The Bug Bux Podcast!
Mega bee per operator, we should be generating about 300 an hour if we're going to be doing a bee removal.
When you quote something like that, is it per hive, square foot, more of a judgment call?
We break it down on how long we're going to take per each removal, and then per beehive. If you have one removal that's going to take us 2 hours, a ballpark of 600, that one beehive, then we multiply that by 18, and that is how we come up with the number of them pricing you for your quote. One of the mistakes is I see, unfortunately, too many operators that will underprice their bee removal services, and that's one of the things that I try to work with operators is, so every beehive that exists is anywhere between 10,000 to 25,000 bees on average. So that is where, if there's a call and say, hey, I have a small beehive, there's never anything small about a beehive.
So let's say that we have a listener, they already have a pest control company, and they're like, man, I get so many bee calls, like I'm considering it, plus I kind of do it as a hobby, but I don't do it professionally. What are some of the things that you can tell them to convince them to do it, and some pieces of advice you might have for them?
One of the key things is you learn from practice. If you are ever interested in working with bees, removing bees, or keeping bees, the suggestion is definitely to see if you can work under mentorship of another beekeeper, to just see what the hands-on practice is like, understand the bee biology of the actual colony. Simultaneously, the more hands-on practice you have, the more you understand what you're looking at when you are exposed to a beehive.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bug Bux Podcast. I'm Allan Draper, happy to be with you. Got a great one for you today. Make sure that you listen all the way to the end. You're going to want to make sure not to miss anything that we cover today. A lot of this is going to be applicable to your businesses and things that you can do to grow your pest control company. So Gene Navarro, he's the owner and CEO of Mega Bee Rescues and Pest Control. It's a family-owned company serving South Florida with a mission to redefine the pest management experience through education, innovation, and exceptional customer service. Under his leadership, Mega Bee has grown into a trusted name for residential, commercial, and municipal pest management, specializing in complex bee removals, integrated pest management, and long-term property protection. Passionate about leadership, business growth, and raising industry standards, Gene is committed to building a company that puts people first while creating lasting value for both customers and his team. All right, Gene, with that, welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Definitely an honor to do so, and appreciate the warm welcoming.
Of course, man. So how have you not been on the show, or have you back when there were other hosts?
Yeah, first time Bug Bux.
First time.
Definitely, yeah, first time. Excited to just kind of share a lot about Mega Bee and us in the industry as a whole, but definitely our first time on this podcast.
What's cool is, so first off, a lot of people don't know this, but you guys make your own honey. And
Yep.
dude, I didn't know that until last Pest World when we were doing the real Pest World. You brought a bunch of jars and I got to sample it, and man, it's awesome. So the honey is incredible, first off. But I think even above that is you walk this line, because we kill insects for a living, right? And you still do that, but with bees, you save them and protect them. So tell me a little bit about your mission behind that, how that started, and what it means to you.
Of course, yeah, definitely. So one of the differentiators about Mega Bee as a whole happens to be that we are beekeepers and pest management. So this is where we mix agricultural practices with pest management for public safety. So we do both best of both worlds in that case. With the bees, we happen to specialize and do extensive amount of work of bee removals. That goes from something as simple as water meters, something on the ground, as much as going up 90 feet high, to removing a beehive with an aerial lift. So it's something that we do have to practice, where we relocate the bees, we keep the bees under our management. We have different apiaries throughout South Florida. And then throughout the seasons, we harvest the honey. We then are able to sell the honey to locals or around the US, but simultaneously, we also mix it with our pest control customers, which love to receive our honey on that detail as well. On the other standpoint, we do pest management for obviously residential, commercial, but because we work a lot with municipalities on bees, we also work with municipalities on pest control. So that is where it's a little bit of interesting dynamic, where we are introduced to a lot of properties because of the bees. A lot of pest control companies don't touch bees, which is a specialty. That is for us where they come to us and they say, Gene, we have these bees. Our pest control currently doesn't do any of this. Can you guys help? Definitely. We propose them on the bees. We give them a benefit that if they have services with us, we give them a lifetime bee protection throughout the entire structure. That if they ever get bees again, we take care of it at no additional cost.
That's incredible. So let's say that, we have a listener and they're considering, they already have a pest control company up and running, been in business 5-8 years. And they're like, man, I get so many bee calls. Like I'm considering it. Plus I have a passion on the side. I kind of do it as a hobby, but I don't do it professionally. What are some of the things that you can tell them to convince them to do it, and some pieces of advice you might have for them?
Definitely. One of the key things is you learn from practice, and meaning that if you are ever interested in working with bees, removing bees, or keeping bees, the suggestion is definitely to see if you can work under mentorship of another beekeeper to just see what the hands-on practice is like, understand the bee biology of the actual colony. Simultaneously, the more hands-on practice you have, the more you understand what you're looking at when you are exposed to a beehive. I will share with you, Alan, that when I started working in pest management, I didn't know what a beehive looked like. I just saw bees, sting an insect, comb, and that's all I knew. But over time, over education, I then understand what reading a beehive looked like. That once I understood that, and then going to a bee removal, it changed the dynamic of the removal. It helped me assess how long the beehive has been there, how healthy or not healthy it's been, a little bit of the nectar flow, pollen flow. There's so much once you become a beekeeper that it helps the practice of bee removal. So it just helps seamless practice.
So I've never been around a active beehive on site, but I have seen instances where queens have left for whatever reason. I don't even know. But one time I was in Michigan, and queen must have ended up on this residential tree because all the workers were there, what was it? Few hundred, 500-600, maybe something like that. But there was no hive. They were just on this tree, and it looks like the queen got transplanted. Tell me a little bit about what you think happened and what was going on there.
Yeah, this is great, Alan. I'll tell you why. A little bit of a backstory before I go on that detail. So I currently educate at UF on the topic of structural bee removal and bees.
That's awesome, man. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's really nice because your scenario and your question is very similar to what we get calls over the phone. XYZ customer calls, hey, we're seeing thousands of bees on our tree. It wasn't there yesterday, but it's there today. Why out of nowhere did these thousands of bees show up? Well, what happens is the nature of reproduction on bees is once they have an established beehive somewhere, they're going to grow, reproduce, the nature of reproduction. Once they get to a capacity that it's just overly populated, what happens is the worker bees then say, hey, there's too many of us. We can't stay here. We need to go on. What happens is the bees will then, the worker bees, they will choose a random egg within the colony. They will feed it something called a royal jelly, and that egg becomes the chosen queen that's about to be born. When she is then born, there can only be one queen per colony. Hence, the old queen leaves. When she leaves, half of the colony leaves with her, and that is how the term swarm comes about. And that is where you have thousands of bees magically, in a sense, appearing from somewhere that it was never there before. Now you have thousands that have chosen a location, and they all came from an original beehive somewhere nearby. So in this case, in your case, when you saw the bees on the tree, that means within a radius, there was a beehive that had grown to a capacity that the bees can no longer have, and they end up splitting. So in the beekeeping world, that is where we can reproduce our own bees if we need to by doing splits. But in this case, whenever the bees are not managed, they overgrow and they split on their own. And now that's how they become from one hive to two hives, two to four. And this is how we get called for 12 bee removals in one property, 18 bee removals in one property. And those are the type of projects that we take on.
So are you saying that the newly selected queen, that egg gets, they get the old hive, the old queen has to go somewhere else and start a new colony? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And what's really interesting, this is why bees are super organisms and they build super colonies, right? What's interesting is that the bees, before they leave their old hive, they intake a lot of nectar. So when they go leave their colony, they have nectar, which is for them their fats, and then they can build their wax. And this is how then the wax starts getting built because they already have all of this in their system. And then the worker bees start building. And that is how then the new queen, the old queen, sorry, has wax to then lay her eggs in.
That's so interesting. So in this scenario where they ended up in this residential tree it was in between the street and the sidewalk. So it wasn't like up by somebody's house. It wasn't protected. It wasn't a good spot, right? What if you get called to that job? What do you do about it?
Of course, the key factor right there is we have to determine if the bees are on a tree that belongs to the homeowner's property or if the bees are on a tree that belongs to the city or municipality in that area. If it's on the homeowner's property, we then educate her on the fact that unfortunately it's within her property and we need to remove that beehive. And then the service charge goes to her. If it's on the city's property, she then has to do her due diligence and reach out to the city. And this is where we get our introduction to a lot of cities. Hey, we call the bee guy and he currently wants to work. He's here or he's around the area. And then that is how the cities projectly either call us or who they have in contract with at the moment.
So in this scenario, I think technically it would have been the HOA because it was on the other side of the sidewalk. I think it was the area taken care of by an HOA. You get a hold of the HOA, they contract, agree to a price, you come out. What does that process look like for you? One of the concerns in this particular case, and this is like 12 years ago, but kids were all over the place. And I tried to tell them like, hey, there's not a huge worry, kind of keep them away, make sure they're not disturbing the tree, shaking it, stuff like that, because they were trying to do that. What you get called, you're out there. What's step one for you, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, of course. Definitely, there's a fact we cannot deny. Bees are a stinging insect at the end of the day, and there's people that are allergic to bees. So that's just a fact that we have to obviously put out there. So the moment we get called out, we get approved upon the job that needs to be done. Accessibility is key. So if it's something that it's accessible to us on a ground level or something underneath 20 feet that we can do on a ladder, we approach the ladder, we set it up. Safety is key for us. We will either take a job or we turn down job if it becomes a little too high risk. I'll share with you. If it's something is 14 feet high, we consider that. We make sure that we are set up. We then prep for success. What that means is we have all of our equipment that we are able then to remove the bees. And one of the key factors in our equipment happens to be a smoker. The reason beekeepers and bee removal companies work with smoke, it's not to make the bees fall asleep. It's not for the bees to just, be more docile. But in reality, what the smoke does when you have it in the air, the smoke blocks the communication channels so the bees are not able to trigger one another that there's a threat in that area. So bees communicate just like insects, right? They communicate through pheromones and smells. So the moment you work without smoke and you make a very strong movement in their colony that's not to their liking, all it takes is one bee to release an alarm pheromone and it triggers the rest of the bees. And then they go towards a carbon dioxide that they pick up, hence why beekeepers normally wear something on their head and they normally sting around the face because of that carbon dioxide. So once the smoker is set up, we apply the smoke to the bees. We almost introduce our welcoming that we're in the area. We're going to be working with them. And then we go about the removal process. We have different tools in our toolbox that help us work efficiently for the removal, whether that is a natural removal, which is just removing the natural comb and rebuilding it in a bee box that becomes their next forever home. Or nowadays, there are bee vacuums that we are able to use and that it allows us to be more efficiently. So there are different platforms and different ways for us to be able to work seamlessly when it comes to bees overall. And it's just one large process that we are able to do when it comes to bees. But we always like to say no one beehive is like an exact beehive overall. They can all be different. They can all differentiate. But I will tell you that we've definitely learned a lot from just best practices as a group. And that's how it's been overall. As mentioned, one of the key things is the smoker that we use, that we introduce to the bees, that allows us to understand and them understand that we're on site. But simultaneously, there's different things such as a bee vacuum, there's a bee box, and depending on the scenario, is what we choose is then the best practice. That as a beekeeper, we are able to mimic and we're able to manipulate the bees to go from one area to then their next forever home, which becomes a bee box. So there are different practices that allow us to be able to transport the bees from one location, which is a tree in this case, into the physical bee box, which requires us to rebuild the beehive, and it requires time. Bee removals are time consuming. Therefore, it is a service that needs to be done. But the best practice is obviously ensuring that you're able to do the service, but simultaneously also it needs to make sense for the operation as a company.
So in your case, you guys will take those bees and put them in your care, right? On your property.
Correct. So we have different apiaries, which is a bee farm throughout South Florida. And that's property that we have, or it's properties that municipalities or cities have also provided, and have allowed us to put bees on their property as well.
So how do you measure either the bee population size or the different colonies or the honey output? Like give me an idea of how large your operation is on the bee side.
Yeah, of course. So put it this way: one beehive, one bee box, or even a beehive. If you or anyone listening ever sees a beehive, just know that there isn't tens, there is not hundreds. There's always thousands. The queen bee
Oh,
can
okay.
output 2,000 eggs a day if she has the right capacity to do so. So every beehive that exists is anywhere between 10,000 to 25,000 bees on average. So that is where, if there's a call and say, hey, ma'am, or hey, guys, I have a small beehive. Hence, there's never anything small about a beehive. So that is where one beehive can have thousands of bees, right? And if one apiary, we have, let's say, anywhere between 100 to 125 bee boxes, we multiply that, right, by the amount of bees per colony, and we have hundreds of thousands of bees per bee yard. Now, each bee box throughout the season can produce, depending on the beehive, it can produce anywhere between 15 to 35 pounds of honey, and that honey is then we're able to resell it and use it, and it's an ongoing operation overall.
If you run a pest control company, you already know. Calls don't come in when it's convenient. They come in when you're on a job after hours or when your team's already slammed. And every missed call, that's a lost customer. That's why more pest control companies are using same-day AI. It answers every call, qualifies the lead, and books the job automatically. So instead of playing phone tag, you're just stacking booked jobs. No missed calls, no wasted leads. Visit gosameday.com or DM us same day on Facebook. For the listener that's considering, hey, we get a lot of these bee calls and they're getting so many and they've been referring them. What percent of your overall income is due to bees versus general pest?
Yeah, man, that's such a great question. And one of the things I would love to transition eventually is how we turned bees into reoccurring business, and how we turned in our bee calls from one time to ensuring that we have long-term customers, because bees are seen as a specialty that I will relate it similar to wildlife. A lot of times people don't necessarily take on wildlife because it's one-time business, but in our case, and we'll get to that in a second, in our case, at one point, Alan, we were almost 70% bees,
Wow.
30% general pest control. What's
Mm-hmm.
interesting is now we've turned that around and we are 70% general pest control because stinging insects is part of our pest plan. And then we have 30% bees, which is for us considered now as one time. The reality is we've transitioned the way we started operating and the way we got calls to the way now it's structured for us to be able to scale within our specialty.
That's so cool. So we have branches in a few different states. And particularly in Boston, we had, I mean, in every state, customers are concerned about the bees. It's just a matter of fact, especially when we're doing fogging, mosquito tick treatments, those type of things. Any type of landscaping, pest control work. And I never got to the bottom of this. We tried to be as careful as we could. What is the real harm with mosquito and tick treatments, the ultra low volume fogging, those types of things when it comes to bees? How prevalent is it for a bee or worker bee that's out and about to be killed through that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's very likely for a bee or for a beehive to be affected by insecticides, and the reason being is what happens when we make applications. Is that if we're treating for mosquitoes, which in reality it's common for pest management because obviously mosquitoes are something homeowners don't have. But when we're making application, it's broad spectrum applications. We know that we're applying into that area. The detail is that sometimes these applications can go into a flowering plant that has nectar and has pollen. What happens as well is that some of these insecticides have residuals, right? And when it's left on this plant, the bee then goes and collects this pollen and nectar, and that is how it picks up, unfortunately, this particular insecticide or product. Then, depending on the active ingredient of the product, that is how then it can either be killed on contact, depending on what the applicator chose, or if it has a residual, the bee can then pick this up and then take it back and have a transfer effect to the rest of the colony. And that is how you can have a colony collapse. And it's very common, actually. And it's something that, on an agricultural standpoint, beekeepers that work in pollination unfortunately struggle with this. So we have bees as well that we provide to local farmers that we have bees that pollinate their goods. So we rent bees to local
Oh, that's
farmers to be
cool.
able to have bees for them to then produce their goods. And that is how if we then have bees in an area that is getting applications of mosquitoes, we can have colony collapse on our behalf as well. So it's very common, unfortunately.
What do we do as pest controllers to do better? Are there certain products? Is there certain strategies in terms of watching for those pollinated plants and avoiding those areas and focusing more on shrubberies and tree? How do we do
Yeah.
better with that?
Yeah, what's interesting is definitely choice of product. We know that there are botanicals out there, hence products that are used for mosquitoes but aren't as effective. But they are definitely safer for pollinators. Another detail too is there are products like Into Care. There are products out there that can be used that are effective while yet not affecting our pollinators. So we set up in hotels and restaurants, particularly Into Care. We use different products that they want to be able to still have a sustainability of nature, let's say, while still having bees, while still having some sort of mosquito management on the back end.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
So, I want to hear about one of the largest hives, most difficult removals, kind of one of your craziest experiences for the listener that has no bee experience like me. That because I've seen TikTok videos of hives that were like the size of half of a house or something. What's something that you've ran into that kind of made you raise your eyebrows a little bit?
Yeah, man, there's so many. I'll tell you so many. There's a few that come to mind. Immediately, I'll share with you one of the funnest ones that stays hold of me is that we got called once that someone said, "Hey, there are bees in a concrete yard site that's been abandoned for about 10 years, and we are going to demolish this area because we need to build a skyrise." Okay, great. One of the practices that we have is we like to do inspections, assessments, especially if we hear the words abandoned, 10 years, bees, right?
Yeah.
So that those are trigger words that we understand. All right, there's been bees there for a long time without care. So we then went, and this was myself, to do an inspection. And I get there, and what's interesting is I look to my right, I see traffic of bees in one area. Great, identified. I keep walking, I see another beehive with traffic of bees. All right. Long story short, there was a total of 18 beehives in this one
Jeez.
concrete abandoned yard site. And it was extremely fun because we ended up doing a site map, we ended up doing a visual presentation to showcase that, hey, this is beyond what you guys anticipated for this to be.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up getting awarded the project to remove the beehive. We ended up assigning 4 of our team members to do the removal process in one day. We allocated truly each team member to 4 beehives, and we tackled it on, and it just became an entire project where dinner that day was great because we all worked so hard, and it was awarding. It was great, but that was probably one of our funnest removals that we did. But we had very similar like removals. We have another removal that we did very similar. They called us out for 1 beehive. They didn't take care of the problem immediately when they called us. Months went on. That 1 beehive reproduced, and then when we went back, they had 4 beehives. They didn't take care of the problem at the moment. And when they called us back months later, they had 12 beehives in that property. And it's very common. So one of the things that if there's people out there that know they have bees, or if there are pest control applicators that have had customers that have had bees and don't take care of it, the nature of reproduction, unfortunately, is that 1 beehive can turn into two, two can turn into four can turn into eight, and then that's how it just grows.
That's
And that
crazy.
is, yeah, and that's the reason why. If the question is why should I remove my beehive, the longer it's been there, the bigger it becomes, the bigger the openings, the bigger the repairs, and it's a domino effect.
So in that case with that, those 18 hives, sounds like each team member had 4, give or take each. How long would it take each one of those teams to remove 4 hives?
Yeah, great question. On average, approximately about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it was a full day of operation, right? If there's 4 beehives, 2 hours each removal and relocation approximately, that's an 8 hour shift technically. So it was an entire days of work, but we were all able to remove an entire 18 beehive in this case.
And when you quote something like that, how are you doing? Is it per hive? Is it square foot? Is it more of a judgment call, kind of a gut feel? How are you quoting that?
Yeah, of course. I think very early on, it's very common for operators to have gut quotes, right? Very early on, all operators don't have the statistic or understanding of what the pricing should be. By now, we understand that mega bee per operator, we should be generating about 300 an hour if we're going to be doing a bee removal. So that is where we know we have, let's say, a beehive that's on a water meter and it takes us an hour or 2 hours. We understand, okay, that takes us 2 hours where the price ball needs to be for us to price that removal. We do incorporate though the travel time that we need to take, and then the relocation time after the process is done. So that is where one removal, it's not just an hour; it can take several hours, but we price accordingly for that. So we break it down on how long we're going to take per each removal, and then per beehive. So in this case, if you have one removal that's going to take us 2 hours, let's just give a ballpark of 600, that 1 beehive, then we multiply that by 18, and that is how we come up with the number of them pricing you for your quote.
Gotcha. So for the operator that's considering getting into it, what are some things that you would recommend that they watch out for? That you've seen people that are just getting into the B game that they're making mistakes with, specifically regarding pricing.
I think it's very common, unfortunately, that new beekeepers or bee removal specialists underprice the removal. They will see a beehive from the naked eye, which is the tip of the iceberg, and they will say, "Oh, that doesn't look like much. There's probably a little bit of bees." And they unfortunately give the expectation to the homeowner, "Ma'am, we need to make a small opening to remove your beehive." And unfortunately, that is unrealistic expectation. The expectation should be, ma'am, we don't know what size is behind that wall. We need to open as much as we need to because we are being hired to remove this properly. Therefore, we do need to remove your entire beehive. And it can be as big as it's been there, unfortunately. So I would say if operators aren't sure on where to price, they need to price accordingly and you need to definitely price higher than anticipated to pay for their trial and error period, which means that every beehive that they approach is going to take them longer than anticipated. And that's where one of the mistakes is. I see, unfortunately, too many operators that will underprice their bee removal services, and that's one of the things that I try to work with operators is price accordingly. And there is no small bee removal. Every bee removal should be treated adequately.
I think it's such a good point because we feel pressure sometimes to get somebody a price as soon as possible so they can make a decision, a buying decision. But with something like this, I think termite is analogous here too. It's like, hey, hold on, we're gonna take a step back. We're gonna take some time, do our due diligence, and make sure we understand the scope of this before we shoot ourselves in the foot. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to quote it, start the job, and then realize that it's 3x. Because then what's that communication like with the customer? So are you saying that in these cases you would recommend, hey, Susan customer, I'm gonna open up the ceiling and we're not gonna give you a price yet? Or how do you handle that? How do you handle that period of, hey, we need to start some work, we need to start doing some due diligence before I have a firm price?
So what's interesting is we actually don't touch anything until we get an approval and we get a price together. Because if someone goes there and tells Mrs. Jones, ma'am, I need to open up to understand how much I'm going to price this, immediately my mind goes to there's time commitment involved. It no longer becomes a free and evaluation or inspection. So in our case, and I'll share with you, one of the best investments that we've made within our gadgets and tools is a thermal camera. It's an infrared camera. That
Oh,
allows
yeah.
us to understand the heat of the bees in the location of where they're at. So we're then understanding if we need to open a soffit, a roof, a concrete block wall, a shed floor, XYZ. Based on that, we then give a quote. And I will share you, we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but we definitely price adequately for the time that we believe that we're going to take on the project. And if it's a little bit too higher than the homeowners anticipate, then we elaborate on the reason why we price the way we are. And most of the times, homeowners understand it. We showcase our work and then we end up winning the bid. But if someone says, hey, I wanted a free removal, can you guys do it for free? It's not the nature of our work, unfortunately. There's a lot of time commitment when it comes to bees, but we happen to do this for a period of time and we price things before we touch things. So now we have an idea of this is something that's going to require about 3 hours of work. Then we shouldn't be pricing this anywhere under 1,000. And again, we just need to understand to pricing adequately. We do set quotas every single day as far as operation to ensure we have production in place to make sure that bee removal makes sense as an operational standpoint.
Man, that's so cool. You guys have it. Like, I'm just sitting here fascinated because I know quite a bit about the pest control industry, especially from a business standpoint. But bees has been just kind of a foreign subject to me. And it's so interesting to me to realize how you have it, you just have it down, man. Especially the quoting and understanding the process and not over leveraging yourself. Because a lot of pest controllers, we think exactly like that. We think, oh, the beekeeper, the value they get is from keeping the hive. And it's like, no, man, there's so much more work that goes into it where that wouldn't justify it. So fascinating, man.
Yeah, it's been great. I will share with you something I maybe want to touch on that I think could be very beneficial to anyone listening. But one of the things very early on was that we did a lot of bee work, and come Christmas time, it was quieter. There wasn't that many bees, right? Notice that I kind of made the transition, and early on, we were doing 70% bees, 30% pest control. The transition came when we ended up including stinging insects in our pest management year-round protection. So if Mrs. Joan has the bees and she currently doesn't have a pest control provider, we let Mrs. Jones know that, ma'am, this is an extensive bee removal that you have. And unfortunately, once you have a beehive, it is very likely for that area to get reinfested throughout the seasons because of the pheromones. One of the benefits about Mega Bee, and just because we are beekeepers and pest management, happens to be that we cover stinging insects in our pest management course and pest management services. And when we were able to transition that detail and that offering to homeowners, we noticed a pattern where homeowners will say, yeah, this is actually my second or third time dealing with bees. I'm just tired of paying additionally every time. So one, it helped us on our retention of customers. Two, it made us stand out to any competing companies that have knocked on doors or have gone to do services.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's been able to get us in the doors of a lot of more customers that have dealt with bees or have had wasps and just they want to have a peace of mind and have the benefit of avoiding overhead. So we include stinging insects, and now it's helped us that every time we get a call for bees, it's the first pitch that we offer is, man, we cover bees in our stinging insect protection. We're happy to do your house. We cover you for roaches, ants, ticks, and fleas. And that is how we were able to transition from a bee removal company into a pest management company and combine those. And now we have retention that we focus on continuously.
That's so cool. I wonder if there's, so I got involved with a product called, back in the day it was called Aversion. Now it's called Slick Barrier. And we actually pitched to Shark Tank, got a deal from Lori that, you know, when they shake hands and like hug and everything, that's the beginning of the conversation. Like everyone acts like the deal's done. But it's basically, it's this epoxy that you paint around the stem wall of somebody's house so that scorpions and other insects don't get it, crawling insects. Because scorpions can't fly, so the only way for them to get into your house is to crawl. So anyway, one of the things that we did was offered annual renewals. And so I was thinking about this like in the context of bees, where it's like, I mean, you're awesome, dude. You go above and beyond because you're saying, if I do one bee removal for you, you're covered for life. Isn't that how you guys do it, or did I miss that?
It's so they do one bee removal with us, but as long as they're active with their pest control services with us. So they have to remain active with their pest control services. And as long as they're active, they're covered year round. The moment unfortunately they happen to move or they stop services for any reason, it voids their warranty.
Gotcha. The cool thing is that you've converted it into a type of recurring revenue where it's like it became part of the guarantee that comes with the Gen Pest. And so in that way, you know, it's working for you guys, which is awesome. My thought was if you weren't, I didn't realize you were doing that, but you could do annual renewals, like where it's like, hey, we just, you know, and it's much less because if somebody has bees, and we got to wrap up here, but if somebody has bees, is there anything, and they get them removed, is there anything that makes it more likely for bees to come back to that area than any other area?
Unfortunately, yeah. It's the pheromones of the bees themselves, right? So what happens is the longer the bees have been there, that's why it's important to remove them as soon as possible. The longer that it's been there, the bees are communicating to one another. They're just communicating. But what happens is the longer they've been in there, the pores within the wood, within the concrete, within all that cavity get penetrated longer with the smells. That is why if you have a structure that has bees, that corner of the wall is more likely to get bees again versus any other area in the house. That is why, you know, we educate the importance of the year-round protection and the importance of making sure, ma'am, you have bees, the property is vulnerable, unfortunately. And yes, we are going to make sure we remove your bees, we clean the area out, we apply a pheromone sealant, we paint the area. So we do have all those practices in place. But as a cherry on top, with our year-round services, if bees ever come back or they swarm in the area, we are a phone call away at no additional charge.
Dude, who would say no to that? That's like,
And it's, and it's been great.
You know, that's exactly what we're trying to do in business, where it's like, dude, that's a no-brainer. Like if I get bees and I call you guys, that's a, dude, I'll have you guys for life, man. Like, and it's such a great, in pest control, we're always trying to distinguish ourselves in terms of customer service, in terms of our branding, in terms of our marketing, in terms of how good our techs are, the pests we cover, all types of things, right? And you guys got this niche down, dude. Like there's nobody else that I know, not just in Florida, but generally that would be able to compete with you guys because of how good you are at both things. That's awesome, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely gone something that we enjoy. We all become beekeepers in what we do. The honey detail has been such a detail as well that just producing our own honey and being able to just give that back to our customers as well when they onboard. It's just been a little sweeter to every transaction as a whole.
So cool, dude. Well, Gene, hats off, man. Like, I knew you were successful. I knew you knew your stuff, but the depth, I mean, dude, you've got it down, man. Like, I'm proud of you. Keep hustling out there. Appreciate your time, dude, and just letting us know, informing us about the bee world. I appreciate you, brother. I'll see you at Pest World, man.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, and we'll stay in touch, man. It was an honor.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bug Bux Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us an honest 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, and we'll catch you on the next episode.